Hey guys, this is Jules. I wanted to go over some of the Dark Brotherhood changes that we're going to be seeing to classes and skill lines and things of that nature. There is going to be a lot of them, and this patch is coming at the end of May, so if anybody hadn't read the patch notes or didn't understand everything in the patch notes, I'm just going to briefly go over each of the classes and the changes that we see, and that will be it. So, Adric's Spear. This is a change to a passive ability in this tree, Burning Light will now scale off of physical damage as well, meaning that those burning light ticks that happen when I use jabs or any Adric Spear ability, it will scale off of my weapon damage rather than spell damage, or it will scale off of spell damage rather than your weapon damage, whichever one is higher, meaning that those ones will hit just a little bit harder on Templar basically, so that's good. Power of the Light is now a stam ability. It still inflicts major fracture, minor breach, and it just stores up all of the damage that you do over a 6-second period and releases it as physical damage. 22% of the damage that you do over that 6 seconds is released as physical damage. I don't think that this skill is tweaked enough just yet for it to be worthy of being on your bar, but I think that it's interesting that they are trying to introduce some more stam skills. I would like to see Crescent Sweep, or the opposite morph of this, become a physical damage ult. I think that Stam Templar absolutely needs it and deserves it, considering that Stam Nightblade now has their disease damage through Incap Strike. DK has Leap, and they also have Corrosive Armor scaling with poison damage now. Stam Templar definitely needs Crescent Sweep to become physical damage in order for there to be some sort of balance between the Stam classes. Changes as far as Magicka Templar, Breath of Life. This skill went from 3 targets to 2. I believe it was last patch, so we've seen the 2, but now we have line of sight healing as well, so people will no longer be able to stand outside of towers or upstairs and be able to be passively healing from a place where they can't see the people that they're healing. This will be an interesting change to group play. It's going to be an interesting change for healers who are big on like positioning and staying out of damage. So it remains to be seen whether this will be too big of a nerf to this class-defining Templar skill or not. We're just going to kind of have to wait and see. I've been told that on PTS it's a little too sensitive. It's picking up, small rocks and trees, and any little thing is considered line of sight to this Breath of Life and other heals nerf. So hopefully that will be tweaked before live, and this will only follow the line of sight rule between mountains and towers and things like that. One of the biggest changes to Templar this patch is Purifying Ritual, which is now renamed to Ritual of Retribution. This used to remove 5 harmful effects, and now it only removes 2. And it also got a pretty significant Magicka increase as far as cost. I believe on live it's somewhere between 2200 and 2500 for me to use on a Stam build. This is now 3600 or so. That's quite an increase, both for Magicka and Stam Templar. It makes it very difficult to use on a Stam Templar, especially open world. I see you being able to probably use it 2 to 3 times, maybe 4 if you're running purple food. That's going to be interesting. Another thing that they added to this skill is damage. It is magic damage. It's 517 on my build right now. If you divide that by the 2 seconds, you're looking at less than what my health recovery is. So the damage of that skill is basically completely nullified. The Sacred Ground passive, this is a new passive for Templar. It still gives major mending. However, it now gives a snare, so a reduction in movement speed by 30% if you're using any of these skills. So Cleansing Ritual, Rune Focus, or Rite of Passage. Any of these skills will snare anybody who is near them. I'm not sure how I feel about this snare. I think that's a little giant of an AoE for a snare, especially a passive snare. This isn't something that you would slot just to snare somebody. Purify is supposed to be a skill that you're using to purify yourself. So it's interesting that something that large would be given a snare. I think there's probably too many snares in this game already, just makes combat very clunky, makes you slow. It's hard to get away from things. I just don't like the idea of passive snares, and I think that it's just harmful to the game. I don't like the changes to Purify whatsoever. I think the 5 harmful effects was fine, the cost was fine, and if they were going to change anything about that skill, it probably should have been a reduction in harmful effects and keeping the same old cheap cost, or leaving this harmful effects and increasing the cost. For me, it just doesn't make very much sense to reduce the amount of effectiveness that a skill has and increase the cost of it at the exact same time. So that's about it for Templar. Moving on to weapon lines. Two-handed is going to be a big one that we see changes with this patch. This is probably the biggest change to two-hander. Dizzying Swing, you probably haven't even really heard of this skill if you haven't been paying attention to the patch notes or PTS. Dizzying Swing is now going to be the morph that has the knockback. So Wrecking Blow used to give a knockback, and it also used to give an empower. An empower just meaning that the skill after a Wrecking Blow does 20% more damage, and that's what the Wrecking Blow gives it. Now Wrecking Blow no longer gives the knockback, but it does give the empower. The knockback was given to Dizzying Swing. However, Dizzying Swing does not have the empower. So those two abilities of that skill were basically just split up between the two morphs. It's probably good for balance. Wrecking Blow was a little too strong on live, and especially, with being able to cancel it and whatnot. But the damage of this cast time ability should probably be adjusted, because in comparison to some of the instant cast abilities, it is doing equal or less than those, which does not make sense for something that is a cast time. So hopefully that will be tweaked or looked at the very least. Executioner is another thing that changed. This used to passively give damage increase to all of the two-hander abilities that were on your bar if you had it slotted, and it used to do 300% more damage. They took away the passive slotting damage increase, and they increased the damage of the actual execute by 50%. So 350% more damage to the ability rather than 300, and they took away the passive one. The other morph of this, Reverse Slash, is still 300% execute. However, it now does an AoE, but I believe that the AoE damage of the targets that are around your primary target is a little weak, and the range is kind of small, so I'm going to stick with Executioner most likely. The 350% damage increase to Executioner is actually very good. So the last thing that we see with the two-hander changes is the change to the opposite morph of Rally, which is Forward Momentum. Just increase the immunity, the snare immunity, to that skill pretty significantly, I believe. Trying to make that skill more viable, that morph more attractive, I think. However, Rally, the burst heals from Rally are just so good if you let it drop down to below 20 seconds, so Rally still probably is the preferable morph. Moving on to One Hand and Shield. The only real significant change that we saw to One Hand and Shield, but it is pretty significant at that, is a change to Power Bash and its related morphs. The preferable one that most people use, Reverberating Bash, or they used to. They increased the damage of this skill by 85%, I believe. However, they took the stun off of it. So this no longer is a stun, or CC, whatever you want to call it, which is really huge for this skill because people used it pretty much for that reason. I believe they also reduced the range of this skill from 7 meters to 5. And that is really the only change to One Hand and Shield. Moving on to Dual Wield. Some of the changes to Dual Wield were namely about Flurry and Hidden Blade. Flurry used to be 1.3 second channel time, it's now 0.6. It also has a new morph name, Bloodthirst, which heals you for 60% or so. of the damage caused by the final hit. So that's new. Rapid strikes, I believe each hit increases the damage of the subsequent hit. Okay. So, and the final hit deals 300% more damage. I think that always did that. So most of the changes to Flurry were just, they reduced the time, and I believe it hits 5 consecutive attacks now rather than 6. They said that they reduced the damage of these skills, or increased the damage, or something of that nature, so that basically the damage will stay the same even though it's going to be less consecutive hits. The changes to Hidden Blade. This got a buff, Flying Blade, the one that gives you major brutality. It used to be 10 seconds for the weapon damage buff. It's now 20 seconds. So I think they're just trying to make that option more attractive and, you know, comparing it to Rally. And this is a new skill, Shrouded Daggers. This will now give you major brutality, but this also does this pretty interesting thing where it bounces off of 2 different targets after your first target. I haven't messed around with it too much, but I hear that it's interesting, and I think the damage increases for each person that you hit. So the second person gets hit for more than the first, and the third person gets hit for more than the second. And those are basically all of the changes to Duel Wield. There were a couple changes as well to bow, so we'll move on to that now. Poison Injection, the dot from this, got a 12% buff. So that's big for this skill. Endless Hail, this used to be called Scorched Earth. This is now going to deal physical damage to the AoE, all the enemies within the AoE, rather than dealing flame damage. That never really made very much sense anyway, so that's a good idea. And Draining Shot will now heal you when the disorient ends. If you look here, 10,951 heal. That's I've seen that crit, and it's a really good heal actually. Draining Shot is actually really good in 1v1s, and I'm not sure, maybe open world as well. So we'll have to see whether that pans out as a good heal to this line. It'd be nice to see another heal within the stamina weapons other than just, you know, your rally and then your vigor from the assault line. So all in all, the changes to bow are definitely good. There were not any changes to Destro staff. All of these things are going to remain the same. And the only thing to Resto staff that changed is that Healing Ward will no longer be able to go through doors, walls, things like that. This is just going to follow the same line of sight checks that healing is going to be across the board, I believe, going to be following, just like the Breath of Life one. So that's the only changes to Destro and Resto. Moving on to some of the changes that they made in the armor trees. Harness Magica now protects you from physical damage as well as magic damage. However, it still only returns magic on magic-based abilities or spells. This is a very interesting change. This basically makes Harness Magica very, very close to Hardened Ward, which is, you know, the Sorc shield that everybody talks about all the time. It's going to be very good for classes like Magicka DK, Magicka Nightblade, and Magicka Templar, because this is now a shield that scales off of your max Magicka, and it also protects you from all damage, and it also can't be crit upon. So it's definitely an interesting change for those 3 classes. I think it could potentially be pretty bad for a class like Sorc, who already has a shield like this, who is going to be able to have basically 2 hardened wards that you know, can stack on top of one another, anywhere from 20 to 25k max shields that protect you from all incoming damage and also can't be crit upon. So it's an interesting change. It's good for some of the classes. It might be kind of OP for Sorc. And then the other change about Harness Magica is the duration used to be 6 seconds. Or sorry, the duration used to be 20 seconds and it is now 6 seconds. So you'll have to be much more mindful of making sure that this shield is up whereas before you were able to just kind of put it up, switch to your DPS bar, and it would be up. But it's definitely going to be pretty tricky. I think 6 seconds is probably a little too short. Maybe 8 or 10 seconds would be a little bit more appropriate. But yeah, so there's some pretty big changes to Harness Magicka there. Medium armor did not have any changes, I don't believe. And heavy armor had actually quite a few changes. For one, Constitution. This has always returned Magicka and Stamina to you when you're hit. However, they increased this passive by 275%, making it more viable for sure as far as sustain. That was the main thing about heavy armor on live. Sustain is such an issue, and when you're using heavy armor, you have to do things like block cost reductions or cost reductions on like a Magicka DK, things like that. So this Constitution passive really makes this set or this armor type viable as far as sustaining with the other ones. The other things that they changed about heavy armor is this is a new passive called Wrath. This used to be bracing, it used to be block cost reduction. Wrath now gives you spell and weapon damage, stacks up to 10 times when you're taking damage. So it's weapon and spell damage, which is great. And I think it's up to 200, right? 20 times 10. Yeah, okay. So this is also good. Another thing about heavy armor on live, the damage just felt so much weaker than your medium armor and your light armor counterparts, which it should feel weaker. It should be a trade-off to run heavy. You are tankier, so you shouldn't have as high burst as the other classes. However, it was just so much weaker. So this is nice. These changes are nice. It gives heavy armor a little bit more sustain and a little bit more damage, which is great. This is what heavy armor needed. And then I believe Juggernaut, the one that gives you max health, it used to be 0.5 and 1% for each heavy armor equipped, and now it is 1 to 2 up to 10%. Or I guess actually up to 14%. But yeah, so that is all about the armor changes. Alright guys, moving on to Vampire. The changes to Vampire have been pretty drastic, so unfortunately we're not able to see all of the skills and passives unlocked because for some reason Vampire is not leveled to 10 on PTS. But the changes to Vampire, Drain Essence, it used to tick 4 times. It's now going to only tick 3 times, but I believe it increases the heals that it gives to you per tick and the damage per tick. So this should kind of even out. Big changes to Mistform. Huge changes to Mistform. Mistform now is basically the Magicka version of Shuffle. It removes snares from you and grants you immunity to snares while you're in Mistform. This is huge for Magicka builds who have not ever had anything like this. The only thing that it does not give you that Shuffle gives you is the dodge chance. Yes, I know, Shuffle stacking, yada yada yada. But Mistform being able to remove snares and grant Magicka builds immunity to snares is huge in a game where, like I was saying earlier, everything passively snares you. So this is definitely a reason to pick up Vampire, I think, in my opinion, as far as Magicka builds go. Mistform is going to be really good. Other changes to Vampire, Supernatural Recovery. This no longer needs to have a Vampire ability slotted on your bar in order to get this, because you're always vulnerable as a vamp to fire damage. Unlike whereas Werewolf, you're not always a werewolf, or you're not always in werewolf form, so you're not as vulnerable to like poison and stuff. I think this makes sense, and I think it's just one more reason to pick up Vampire, especially as a Magicka build. I believe this is 10% at rank 2. 10% magic and stam recovery, which is really good. And I think the only other change to Vampire with the upcoming patch is Darkstalker. This is just the movement speed while you're sneaking. This is only going to be available if you're in Vamp Stage 4, whereas I think it was available in all of the stages before, as long as you had leveled it to 10. Alright, now we gotta get rid of this ugly vamp. Alrighty, back to normal. Alrighty guys, as far as Werewolf goes, there are, I believe, 2 different changes to Werewolf, so let's just get into Werewolf form real quick. Changes to Werewolf. The ultimate pack leader now will summon, I believe, 2 dire wolves that do damage with you instead of the way that it used to be. And then Call of the Pact, not Pact, Pack, will increase, or reduce the cost of remaining in werewolf form for your group up to a maximum of 80%. So those are the only real changes to werewolf that they have brought with the Dark Brotherhood change. Alrighty, hopping into the Fighters Guild, we've seen a lot of changes with the Fighters Guild in this Dark Brotherhood patch. It's basically an exclusive stam tree at this point, kind of to counter the Mages Guild. It used to be this kind of mishmash of like Dawnbreaker was magic damage, Flawless Dawnbreaker gave weapon damage, it was all these different things. It's now been totally condensed, it's all stam. It's all weapon damage. It's totally stam and weapon damage based. Dawnbreaker of Smiting still does a good amount of damage, does a knockdown. That knockdown is not exclusive to Undead and Daedra. It is for anyone. Same thing with Flawless Dawnbreaker. Silver Bolts, the morphs of this. Silver Shards is going to hit 5 targets instead of 2. Silver Leash is now a snare instead of a stun, and it will pull you to the target the second time that you activate it. Ring of Preservation, morph of Circle of Preservation, I believe. This is a really interesting skill. It gives you 10% stam recovery, it gives you 20% reduction of roll dodging, and it gives you minor protection or reduction of damage by 8%, which is the same thing that Templar has through restoring focus. I don't think it'll be necessarily very useful for Templar because of the things that because we already have that buff, because stamina recovery is, you know, not necessary. You just kind of stack all damage in this meta. But the roll dodging 20% reduction I think would be interesting if you paired it with something like Skirmisher, where you get the weapon damage from the dodge roll. So it's an interesting skill, and it's also got a fairly good range. It's fairly large. So Expert Hunter, this skill has completely been reworked. It no longer does any damage at all. It's just a buff. So the days of Camo Hunter being on your death recap for 19,000 or whatever ridiculous number it was at that time, that's never going to happen again. It's no longer a chance at additional damage for proc chance. Camo Hunter is now going to grant you Minor Berserk if you get a crit hit from stealth. And Evil Hunter will just give you a reduction in Fighter's Guild cost by 25% when it's active. So this entire skill is just a buff. So don't even worry about that anymore unless you want to use it as a self buff. Trap Beast, this now deals physical damage, and I believe it applies to anyone and not just Undead and Daedra anymore. Slayer, this used to increase weapon damage by or not weapon damage, it used to increase weapon damage against Undead and Daedra by 3, 6, and 9% with the different ranks. Now it just increases weapon damage percent by 3% for every Fighter's Guild ability slotted. So you could potentially have, you know, 15% weapon damage increase if you slotted all 4 of these skills and the ulti, which is quite a bit. It's a lot of weapon damage to increase. And I think that those are all of the Fighters Guild changes. They are quite a bit. I don't know if I had mentioned this, but Dawnbreaker, both versions are now physical damage as well. So there is no more Dawnbreaker of smiting as like your Sork burst. This is just exclusively, like I said, a stam tree. Moving on to Mage's Guild. The only changes that I think I remember: Ice Comet, no longer cloakable. Can't reflect it, can't cloak it, must block it. That's what you need to know about Ice Comet and Shooting Star. Some changes to Equilibrium, but I don't think they're relevant to PvP. I don't think it's a good idea to be siphoning your health off for resources. You just don't need to do that. Blood Altar, this used to be a health regen. I don't think anybody really uses health regen except for maybe like Patrick Scott. But yeah, so Blood Altar, no more health regen. Instead, it is a life steal. All of the damage that you and your allies do, it turns into a 2% heal. So that could be good. I know that Haxus tested it out a little bit. I don't know if we decided that it was actually viable or not, but I can't imagine it being. I just don't even know what I would do if like Blood Altar was the thing that like people needed to run. Trapping Webs. This used to be a magic skill. It used to be a projectile. It's now not a projectile, it's a ground effect, and it's also no longer a magic skill, it's a stamina skill now. And the magic damage of the venom and the synergize, that's also poison damage. So basically this skill is a completely different skill. It's ground AoE, it's a snare, and it's all physical or poison damage, and it costs stamina now. This is a highly debated change, the Bone Shield change. Bone Shield used to be extremely expensive, used to scale off of health. Both of those things changed. Bone Shield's actually a pretty reasonable cost now, just under 3k, and it scales off of max stam. So this is effectively a shield for stam builds that is actually, viable, or has the potential to be viable. Let's just see one sec. Let's get closer and see. I have just under 40k max stam, and this is a 6k shield. I don't know if I necessarily agree with the changes to Bone Shield. I think that's a little OP with Vigor, Rally, passive and active dodge roll, and Bone Shield. Luckily not that many people want to run it. I just don't know if you can actually justify giving a stam build a shield, but that's just my personal opinion. I guess we will see how that fares in Cyrodiil. Changes to the Alliance War tree. Big, huge change to Procstat. This skill and its both of its morphs were nerfed by 45%, just across the board. However, the scaling mechanism of Procstat increased. So the damage decreased of the base skill, but the scaling increased. It used to be up to 10% and a maximum of 100%. Now it's 25% and 250%. So they said overall it should hit a lot less on a single target person, and it should hit slightly less on a group. I think that the damage to single targets of the last patch, and actually pretty much just since this skill has been in existence, was pretty broken. I used to be able to hit somebody in 6 impen medium on my Magic and Nightblade for like 9.9k single target. That's broken. That's not the point of the skill. The skill's supposed to be a Zerg Buster, so hopefully we're moving in the direction of that. I just want to make sure that the damage from this skill is still viable for groups, especially groups, smaller guild groups that are going to be anywhere from like 8 to 16 people. I think that it's important that this skill is still able to break up large groups of people, and I'm talking large, like 60, 70 groups of people. So if we would just remove AoE caps, then maybe we wouldn't need skills like Procstat, but I digress. And then the only other change to the Alliance War is Guard. I don't really mess around with tanking too much, but I know that guard used to be some sort of like just kind of encompassed you and took all the damage, and now I believe it's more of like a tether, where you tether yourself to a person and you take all of the damage from them and it's applied to you instead. So I wonder when this would actually be effective. I'm thinking I see a lot more PvP tanks around. You know, you see the Templars around with like 60k max health, and it's good. I mean, it's a viable build. PvP tanking is a thing, and you know, obviously you can't taunt, you know, other PvP players. They're not just kind of like gonna run towards you, but you know, if you work on positioning and stuff, tanking can be very interesting in PvP. So it's nice that they're implementing skills like this. It'd be nice to see some variation of roles in Cyrodiil again, because right now it kind of just seems like it's lots and lots and lots of damage, and nobody's speccing into anything else because there's no reason to. That's the most min-maxed possibility. So those are the changes to Alliance War and to guilds, and I'm just going to hop on the other three classes and briefly go over the changes that they've had to them. Alrighty, so now we are on a DK. This is a Stam DK. Just going to briefly go over some of the changes to DK. Nearly all of them were buffs to Stam DK. Very disappointing that there were no buffs to Dragon Blood whatsoever, which is kind of universally accepted to be a skill that's not functioning where it should be, because it's nerfed by Battle Spirit in Cyrodiil. This was definitely disappointing to see that they hadn't made any changes to that whatsoever. But moving on to the Ardent Flame Tree, Venomous Claw and Noxious Breath. This used to be Unstable Flame, and this used to be Burning Breath. They did make these Stam dots a little while ago. I can't remember which patch that was, but they're no longer flame damage. They are now poison damage, which scales with Mighty, which is the same CP passive that works with your physical damage, so it's all in line with Stam. They scale off your max Stam and weapon damage still, and they just deal poison damage, so that's really the only difference with them. And then Combustion and World in Ruin. This used to be Kindling, and this used to be World in Flames. They were just changed to include the poison damage. The other thing that changed about the two abilities is they no longer are fire looking because they deal poison damage. They've got a pretty disgusting looking animation. It looks just like puke. And the other thing is that I guess it's difficult for people to see both yourself and your target. So I think that animation is not very well liked by most people, so I'm wondering if they'll change that off of PTS, but we'll see. Going on to Draconic. I don't think anything changed here in this tree. Though some things definitely should. For instance, this Elder Dragon passive. Health recovery by 5% for each Draconic power ability slotted. This is arguably one of the most useless passives in the game for probably 99% of the people that play DK. I can think of, like I said, probably one person who stacks health recovery, and the fact that you have to slot a skill just to get that 5% health recovery is pretty sad when you compare that to the Nightblade passive that gives you 15% to all resource pools just for being a Nightblade without even slotting anything. Things like that. Imbalances like that with the regen and stuff like that between classes is definitely something that I hope that we look towards in the future, because I mean 5% health recovery doesn't even come close to 15% for health, magicka, and stam without slotting something. That's crazy. Corrosive Armor. This is now DK's second physical damage ult. Of course, they have the ever popular Leap or Take Flight. High damage, low cost, physical damage. First physical damage ulti in the game. Very strong. But now Corrosive Armor deals poison damage. And it also ignores 100% of your enemy's physical resistance, so that works well with Stam DK, and even though this skill isn't really used for the poison damage, like nobody really uses this skill for that dot, but it's nice to see things kind of lining up. Like this is something that ignores their physical resist, so it's going to go and scale with Mighty, so everything's starting to kind of like align, which is nice. Igneous Shields and the other more frag shield, I don't know if you guys remember that. The change to frag shield, I believe it's 6 seconds now, just like other shields, and frag shield does slightly more damage. I think they increased it by 30%. Fossilize. This is the root. The root changed to 3 seconds for all of the different ranks of it, where I guess it used to scale up to 4 seconds, so just reduce the root a little bit. And I believe they increased the damage slightly with this skill. And that is pretty much all of the changes to DK. So I'm going to hop on another class and we'll check out Sorc. Alrighty guys, we are just going to go over Sorc very quickly. Forgive the crappy stats of this Sorc, it's just a template character that I just put together. Changes to Sorc. So negate, the suppression field and the absorption field morphs. These are both going to be considered silences now, and they changed the way that silences work. So this is one of the only, if not the only, silence in the game, and it basically works like it can be applied to anyone. So even if you have CC immunity, it can still be applied to you, and you can no longer CC break it. You have to move out of it. You can dodge roll out of it, or walk, or whatever, but you need to move out of them. So they actually do suppress you, they silence you. You can't do any skills within them. You need to just get out of them. So it's an interesting change. I wonder if this will make this skill viable again for group PvP. Not that it's not viable now, but might make it a lot more viable for burst. Changes to Harden Ward. Highly contested change of 6 seconds. This is the shield duration change that we've seen across the board with a lot of the shields, going from 20 seconds to 6-second duration. Nothing about Harden Ward changed other than the actual duration of it, but we'll just put it on for 1 second just so we can see how short 6 seconds is. Okay, it's over. The duration is pretty short. Like I said, I think a little bit earlier, I think maybe 8 to 10 seconds is a little bit more appropriate, but I'm not sure whether they'll actually change that. However, the other good thing that Sorc got that we already talked about was Hardened or Harness Magicka. So we have 20k shields, just with some pretty janky armor, and this mitigates all incoming damage, physical and magical, and it also cannot be crit upon. So if you're good about switching your bars to apply your shields, hopefully this won't be too much of a nerf. And if it does end up being too much of a nerf as far as the duration, then perhaps Zos will give us 10k shields or 10-second shields or something like that instead. 20k was way too long. It just allowed people to kind of AFK and just remain on their DPS bar and kind of forget about their shields. But if you can see, just even as I'm talking, the need to reapply shields so frequently, just at the 6-second mark, is a little bit much, I think, in my opinion. Changes to bound armor. Let's see, which one gives max magicka? This one. This only applies now. It does not change your outfit. Pretty minimal, but it applies when you do it, and that's it. So that's a change some people wanted to see, because if you wanted to run this, you absolutely had to have the costume on, and it was just not something that everybody liked, and that was a change that people wanted to see. So the other change to Sorc, Hurricane. This used to be Thundering Presence. Still Stam. However, it's completely different now. It's still an AoE. It no longer does shock damage. It does physical damage, I believe. Yeah, physical damage. This is a Magic-a-Sorc, but we'll just put it on just so you guys can see. You know, it's just a circle. Basically, it's like an AoE that does damage, and as the duration continues, it grows and grows in, you know, in range up to 9 meters, I believe. They did take away the Major Expedition from Thundering, which I thought was a pretty good contribution to Stamsorc. You know, just like Fangers was saying the other day, that was kind of the only thing that Stamsorc really had, was their speed and their mobility over the other Stam classes. And now they don't. Stamsorcs don't really have anything. They don't have an ult, whereas Stam Nightblade, you know, has their in-cap now. Stam DK has 2. They don't have any single target Stam ability. They don't have any dots. Some of their passives are decent for, like this one's good. Expert Mage gives them weapon damage for each Sorcerer ability slotted. But I mean, if none of your Sorcerer abilities are worth slotting for a Stam build, then that's not very good. Your pets. Pets, I believe, got an increase health. All of the pets and all of the summons got 5k increase. Let's see what these passives are. I think there's one that gives extra Stam recovery when a Daedric summoning ability is slotted. However, I mean, what options do you really have? I guess you could just have bound armaments. That's the only one that would even make sense on a Stamsorc. And then magic and stamina costs. So yeah, Stamsorc is heavily reliant on the weapon lines. So it's definitely something to consider. Magic-a-Sorc I still think is in a pretty decent place. And other than the hardened ward change, nothing else really changed about Sorc. So that's that. Alrighty guys, I am now on a Nightblade, and we're just going to go over some of the changes that Nightblade had. All of the buffs to Nightblade were not for Magicka Nightblade, they were to Stamina Nightblade. So none of the skills that really changed or anything like that will really affect you if you're a Magicka Nightblade, other than maybe the proc stat change. In-cap Strike, this is a cheap ultimate. It now deals disease damage instead of magic damage, so this will scale better with a Stam Nightblade's max stamina and weapon damage. Killer's Blade, the same thing. This used to deal magic damage, and now it deals disease damage. This was a big one because it cost stamina but scaled off of magic damage for a long time, and it made absolutely no sense. So at the very least, this morph, it's a stamina morph, deals disease damage, makes sense. The other change to Nightblade was also in this tree, Relentless Focus. This is the buff that gives you the Stam recovery, and then you can proc the Assassin's Will, is what everybody calls it, but I guess they're calling it Assassin's Scourge. 4 light attacks and an Assassin's Scourge. The big thing about this is that the spectral bow that you are aiming at them is also no longer magic damage, it's disease damage. And like we reviewed earlier, disease damage, mighty, disease and poison are basically just as good as making a skill physical damage. So, because they scale just as nicely with that. So, what else? There was also a change to Cloak, which I had also mentioned earlier. Cloak now no longer will be able to cloak meteors, which is kind of a big deal. Meteor is now no longer reflectable or cloakable, so there's no way to really deal with meteor at all. But that's something that you should know about Cloak. There is a bug on PTS, or actually we're not sure whether it is a bug or whether it's intended, but you are targetable with skills that are halfway through their channel while you are in Cloak. So if I were to start up a Wrecking Blow and you were to pop the Cloak right as, say my sword is on the ground and it's, making an upturn, when the sword actually makes contact, the person will be pulled out of stealth. Now, for the longest time, you weren't supposed to be able to be targetable with single target abilities while in cloak. We don't really know what's going to happen with that, whether that's going to remain or whether that's just a bug. Just be aware of that. Also, ambush. Ambush hasn't changed, but things have changed to be a little bit more like ambush, just with like pathing in this game. Other skills used to follow. Let's see if we can find something to target. Probably not, actually. Never mind. Basically, ambush would go over objects, and other crits or other charges would go around objects. Obviously, ambush doesn't go over all objects, but I believe they made a lot of the charges in this game to be more like ambush. So that's something to keep in mind. And those are basically all of the changes to Nightblade this patch. And that will wrap up all of the different classes and all of the different tree lines and all the changes and all the skills. If anybody has any questions, or if anybody wants to discuss class balance or any of these different skills, the forums is a really great place to go to talk to people about everything that you think, and it's good for all of us to kind of generate conversation, because that's how things get changed in this game, for the better or worse. So drop a line, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm sorry that it was extremely long, but we had a lot to get through. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you guys later. All right, bye.